All right, test 1, 2, check how we doing. Everything working? Sweet, that sounds good. Let's get this thing going. Boom, there I am. Hello and welcome to another Monday afternoon Ableton office hours stream. My name is Zaak Kerstetter, and I will be just sitting here for the next few hours answering all of the questions you may have. I got a few questions coming in from Discord that we're going to start off with today. But after that, it's really kind of open-ended and we can go wherever the wind takes us. But feel free, if you have any questions, pop them in chat. Let me know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, all that kind of stuff. So there are 2 questions that were asked in Discord that I'm just going to go ahead and just dive right into it, because why wait? You know, no filler here. One of the questions was about time signatures and tempo changes, which I want to actually talk about second. And then the other question is kind of related and has to do with the situation you might run into when you are using something like Simpler or really anything that's warped. And I'll go over a couple different examples of this. If you have something in the Simpler here, and then you use the halftime or double time buttons here, or if you are warping something and you use the halftime and double time buttons here. And correct me if I'm wrong about this question. You're asking specifically about why when you halftime something, or when you double time something, the BPM gets slower, and when you halftime something, the BPM gets faster. Correct? That was the question, more or less? Because the same thing applies in here. You turn warp on, then you halftime and double time things, but it doesn't tell you the BPM here. So let's start with that, because I think this is really interesting and it's really fun. So we're going to start off with just this random drum beat. Turn this down a little bit. There's our drum beat. And we are playing this currently at 80 BPM because this drum beat was recorded at 80 BPM. And we know this is recorded at 80 BPM for 2 main reasons. Number 1, it says 80 in the title of the clip, which is a pretty good indication. And then also down here in the segment BPM, it says 80 right here. So the relationship between your segment BPM and your global tempo is very, very important. And the way this works is that in your segment BPM, you want this to always be the original recorded tempo of that clip. So because this is recorded 80, we're leaving this at 80. We're not going to touch this. We're going to leave it alone. If this is incorrect for whatever reason, say you were to manually click and drag it, check out what happens. The timing of my transients moves from on the grid, where I want it to be, to being off of the grid, and therefore won't line with the metronome and won't line up with anything else that's going on in my song. And it's not going to be good, and it's going to sound terrible. So you want to keep your segment BPM at the original recorded tempo of this clip. Now, the exception to that is that you can halftime or double time your tempo, and then it will stay on the grid. So when you hit this button, you can see it takes our segment BPM from 80 to 160. And we can see the timing here of our grid changes. So now this is going to be halftime. It's going to be slower. But it stays on time with the grid. Same thing if I go the other direction. If I hit this button twice, it goes down to 40 BPM. This is now going to double time it. Like that. So the question was, why is it that when the BPM gets lower, does it get faster? And when BPM get higher, it gets slower? I believe is the question. And this has to do with the relationship between the segment BPM and the global tempo. When your segment BPM and your global tempo are the same, it's going to sound normal. But as you speed up your global tempo, it obviously speeds up the tempo of the clip. And when you slow down the tempo, it obviously slows down the tempo of the clip, right? So what Live is doing is it's assuming that okay, the original tempo of this clip is 80 BPM. So what I have to do is I have to slow it down in order to play at 63 BPM. And then as it goes up, if I make this 120, it thinks, okay, this was originally at 80, so now I'm speeding it up to play it at 120. So that's what's happening here. So Live is taking this as the original tempo and then speeding up to match it or slowing it down to match whatever the global tempo is. So what this means is if we leave this at 80 and we double time this, that means it's treating the original tempo as if it's 40, which means it has to speed it up to play it at 80. And then same thing going the other direction. If it's at 160, it assumes that this clip is recorded at 160 BPM, so it's slowing it down to play it at 80. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that kind of answers that question there. But that's why when you change your segment BPM here, or when you do your halftime and double time buttons, that's why it moves the opposite direction you think it's going to, because it either wants to speed it up to double time it or slow it down to halftime it. Cool. As long as that makes sense. It's a good question, though. It is a little weird until you get used to it, and then you realize that, like, oh, the relationship between the segment BPM and the global tempo is super, super important. One other thing I would like to point out, since we are just talking in general about segment BPMs and global tempos, is that the closer these two numbers are to each other, the better audio quality you're going to get. The further away from each other they are, the more stretching it has to do, and the more you lose audio quality. So for example, if I slow this down a bunch, you can hear it gets all kind of like stretchy and grainy and kind of weird. And so if you generally want your segment BPM and your global tempo to be within about 20 BPM in either direction before you really start to notice it. So just watch out for that. So if you're already working at like 150 BPM and this is at 80, you could just hit this button. Now Live assumes it's at 160, and the difference between 160 and 150 is much smaller than 80 and 150. So you can use the halftime and double time button to match whether you like working at high tempos or you like working at low tempos. What's up, username? How are you doing today? Interesting. So he's asking, have I noticed Ableton doesn't seem to follow conventional tempo parameters for compound time signatures projects? A 6/8 at 160 BPM on a metronome is not the same tempo as 6/8 in Ableton. Interesting. I have not noticed that. I'm literally right about to answer the other question from Discord, which has to do with time signature changes and tempo changes in Live. So that we'll talk about it a little bit more, and we can see if you notice anything that answers that question. So the other question was, how does one handle? I'm doing quite well. Thanks for asking. How does one handle tempo changes and time signature changes in Live? I'm going to do these one at a time because they're both really interesting topics that involve a bit, but they're both kind of similar in terms of how you do it. So if you want to do a tempo change, there are a number of ways to do it, in my opinion. I'm going to do the first how we would do it in a situation like using the session view. Generally, I don't do a lot of tempo changes in the session view, but sometimes it happens. Let me do something like this so you guys can see what's going on. So if I wanted a tempo change in like a live performance setup kind of situation where I want to be able to jump back and forth between different tempos, if you go over to your master track and you double click on your scene, down here you have options for controlling tempo and time signature for both of them. So if you want this particular scene, this entire row, to be a particular tempo, say I want it to be 100, you type in 100, and hopefully you can see that. You should be able to see it. This is now lit up blue, which now means when I launch this scene, it's going to automatically change my tempo to be 100. And I can do the same thing here on this one. Say I want this one to be 65. Type in the number. And now when I launch this scene, it's gonna be slower. So that's how you can jump back and forth between different time signatures in the session view. And you can do the same thing with time signatures. So if you wanted this one to be in, 6/4, you just type that in there, and then boom. As you jump back and forth, this one's in 4/4. Launch this one. This one's in 6/4. If you want to do something like that. This is in Live 11. If you're using Live 10, all you would really need to do, oops, wrong key command, is go in here and you would type in the tempo. So say it would be 110, and then add BPM at the end, and that will do the same thing. This does not work in Live 11 though. They've changed it so you do tempo changes down here now. Okay, so after I was asking, what would you do if you improv without a click, and you want to take a loop from that session? Can Live guess the BPM? I don't want me tapping tempo to stretch the audio. Yeah, so if you are just recording something, if you just like record yourself beatboxing or something like that, and you didn't do it to a click, I would probably, unfortunately, my microphone setup, because I'm streaming, is different than my microphone setup than when I'm recording. So this might be tricky to demonstrate right now. But basically, I would just manually warp it. So say I did something like this where like the timing was a little bit off on this guy. I would go in and like for the really important parts of the clip, just double click, add a warp marker to stretch things around and then kind of like move them a little bit more in place. And then you should be pretty much good to go. Or just quantize. So if you had something like this, go to your quantize settings, try quantizing. That would also help kind of put you on the grid. Because you'll notice that this segment BPM, it's on a per warp marker basis. So if I add a warp marker here and I add a warp marker here and I start to move this around, check out what happens to the segment BPM. It'll change depending on where I move this. So warp markers are using the segment BPM to shift timings around on things. So that's probably what I'd do, is if it's like, as long as it sounds cool as a loop, just like, if you recorded yourself beatboxing for, 2 bars, find where that 2-bar loop is, set that as a loop marker, and then try to quantize it within the context of however long your performance is. So the current tempo in terms of global tempo doesn't matter, because you can always change that. That can always be whatever you want it to be. In order to get it on the grid, if it's just a kind of like a sloppy or kind of a loose performance, you're most likely going to want to use warping. That's going to be the best way to do it. I'm trying to think there's like any other situation where like you record something and the timing's off. Yeah, you're gonna want to warp things and just use warp markers to get things on the grid. Or, you could just turn on the metronome and then record it to the metronome, and that way it's pretty close to staying on time. These are all great questions, though. A lot of times, like things with like timing and warping and the grid in general can be really confusing until you get really comfortable with them. Cool. So tempo changes in the session view, done right here. Then, if we want to go over to the arrangement view, if I want to do a tempo change in the arrangement view, the way we're going to do that is in the master. If we go to our automations, our automation options, we have underneath mixer, we have song tempo. So down here, let me catch up with chat for a second. So I found in the past 10 hours into a project, and I suddenly realized that the project BPM changed without me noticing. I think it happens inadvertently when recording a new MIDI track that perceives it as a different tempo than the project. So the recording MIDI will not change the global tempo. That's not really a thing that's going to happen unless you have MIDI mapped to the global tempo and change the settings on your MIDI controller. So it's possible you knocked it by accident or something happened. The only time that Live will change the tempo on you, and you might not realize it, is if you're using the capture function. You guys have hopefully used capture before. If I were to just go in here, use this guy from the other day. So if I go, oh, that sounds terrible. I need to, whatever. If I do that, and I go in here and I hit capture, that will sometimes change the global tempo if there's nothing else going on in your session. If you're not using the capture function, I don't know anything that will, yeah. So if you're using capture, capture can change your tempo, but I found it only really does it if there's nothing else going on in the song. So like in this situation, I already had clips going on. I already had clips happening in this session. It didn't change the tempo. But now if I try it, it changed the tempo a little bit, unless I just happened to before play it on 65. So capture will sometimes change your tempo. So that might be it, but usually then it'll be with it'll capture the tempo that you played at. So most likely you're playing it to the tempo of your song, so hopefully it won't change it too much. But capture will sometimes change things in terms of your tempo. All right, let's go back here. Let's Command Z to undo all that stuff. Cool. All right, so tempo changes in the arrangement view. In the master, underneath mixer, there's gonna be an option for song tempo. We can change the minimum and maximum range here. Right now it goes 60 to 200, but then we can just automate things right here. Dord, you can check out Zenotop, Zenotop, on Spotify or SoundCloud or Bandcamp or any of the places that music is, and that's where you can find my music. I haven't released a whole bunch of stuff recently just because I've been super busy with teaching, but that's going to change soon. I get some stuff coming down the pipeline. So yeah, so automating things here, automate like you would anything else. It's going to change the tempo over time. And we can see this is now automated over here. Like that. In terms of how I would do the practical application of this, I think in most styles of music, especially most styles of electronic music, tempo changes are really hard to pull off. And like Daft Punk can do it. I've heard it done a few other times. It's certain kind of genres you can get away with it more than others, but tempo changes are, especially long tempo changes, tend to be kind of awkward for people that are dancing, right? If you're making dance music, like people are used to steady rhythms, and then if you do like a long tempo change, it can work. Like, prove me wrong. Like go for it. If you're feeling like I really want to do a tempo change here, don't let me try to dissuade you from it. Just know that sometimes tempo changes can feel awkward, and you might be better off with either, number one, not a tempo change, or number two, instead of doing a long, slow tempo change, just doing like a instantaneous one. So something like this, where we maybe start at one tempo, and then like, let's do this actually. I just ruined it. Something like this, where this part of the song, this set of however many bars of loop are going to be one tempo. And then as soon as you get to that kind of like transition from one section of the song to the next, it just jumps. That can work. It also tends to be a little awkward. But of course, the other option is you could half time and double time things, and that way you don't need to do any tempo automation. In this case, we can stay at, keep this at 80, and I'll chop this guy out of here, and we will half time it. So this section will be normal tempo. Then we got our halftime section. And then we go back to normal tempo. So rather than automating the BPM of the entire thing, I just pick the things I want to be halftime them specifically. You can do this with both audio and with MIDI. And then I don't need to do any tempo automation, and it makes my life easier. So those would be kind of your ways to do tempo automation. You either have scenes that are tempo mapped using the feature over here on the master, or you have automation in your master that you can either do over time, or you can make instantaneous just by making it jump from one tempo to another. Any questions about tempo changes, automating tempo changes, that kind of stuff? Like I said, they can be a little tricky to pull off in some situations, but when they work, they really work. And it can be a really cool way to, I don't know, make your song feel like it's especially like building an energy and kind of moving and evolving over time. If there's anybody out there who is just joining us, feel free to toss any questions you may have in the chat, and I will try to get to them as soon as I possibly can. So username was asking about some synths will introduce unintended artifacts with tempo changes if they have parameters that are following the global tempo. That could happen for sure. I don't think it's super common because things, especially if you're doing like with effects that are tempo synced or like an arpeggiator that's tempo synced, it'll move with the tempo change and it shouldn't do any weird artifacting or anything like that. Like delays, for example, will change in pitch if you change the tempo and you have a synced delay. The pitch of the delays will change, and that'll be kind of weird. But most tempo synced effects will do fine with a tempo change like that, like even like a long, slow tempo change. What's up, Jeff? How are you doing today? All right. Then the other question was time signature changes. So let me actually get rid of all of this stuff. I don't know how I ended up with the time signature change in here and why it's not letting me delete it. All right, we'll just do this. Cool. So if I would like to do a time signature change in live, you can do so by, is it because I automated time signature changes? Let me delete all this stuff out of here. All right. What have I done? Why will it not let me? It's letting me add locators, but not time signatures. All right, making a new project. There we go. So this is the way it's supposed to work. So if you would like to add a time signature change in live, the way you can do so is right click up in this area where you normally add your locators and you hit insert time signature change. And then you can set this up to be whatever time signature that you want. So if I want this part to be in 6/4, now this is in 6/4, and we can see from here to here is still in 4/4. It tells us, maybe a little hard to see, but tells us 4/4 right here. And then bar 9, it switches to 6/4. And then say over here, I want to do another one of like 5/4. And then you can move these around if you want to. You can see it changes the grid and the grid's being weird. But that's how you would add a time signature automation here. However, one of the things you need to be aware of when it comes to doing time signature changes like this, let's grab another drum beat to toss in here. I'll do a different one this time. So if I just take this and I drag this through here, we're going to take a listen to this drum beat on 4/4 over here, and then 6/4, and then 5/4. You may notice it sounds exactly the same. So when you are automating the time signature of your session in live, the only two things that change are the grid and the metronome. So if we listen to it again with the metronome turned on, why is that off? This drum beat's weird. Let's try a different one that's more on time. So you're going to hear it's going to sound on time with the metronome. So it still sounds exactly the same. The metronome has changed to now be in 6/4, and the grid has changed to be in 6/4, but the clip itself stays in 4/4. You can't like change the clip's timing just by changing the time signature. So watch out for that. But that's how you would put in time signature changes if you are going to include that in your song. And that way the grid and the metronome line up with the timing of your clips. Also keep in mind that each one of these clips has its own individual time signature down here. So while I might be looking at this clip right here, where it says 6/4 up here, the grid down here is still in 4/4. So watch out for that. So if you wanted the grid down here to be in 6/4, you could change the grid down here to be in 6/4, and now it's in 6/4. So there's two grid markers, or there's two time signature markers. There's the time signature marker down here, which is on a per clip basis. And then you have the time signature marker up here, which controls the metronome as well as the spacing and timing of the grid itself. So watch out for that. And then if you want to delete these, you can just click on it and hit delete, and that'll delete those time signature markers. But yeah, that's how you'd automate time signatures as well as tempo. But those are really great questions. If you guys are just joining us, feel free to toss any questions you may have in the chat. If you are enjoying what's going on here, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe button, any of that kind of stuff. I am greatly appreciative of all that. Marco, let me get to you. Welcome. Let me get to your question just 1 second. I need to read After Party's question here. What's up, Isaac? So After Party's asking, how do I keep MIDI tracks from sending program changes to my external hardware? I only want to send MIDI notes. Feel free to answer after the topic time signature. So yeah. So you're in a situation where you are writing your MIDI in live, and you are sending program changes in addition to MIDI notes out to an external instrument through something like the external instrument device. Is that the situation here? Sending MIDI out to whatever your output is. Well, it shouldn't be sending program changes unless you have put program changes in your MIDI. So I'm not sure why I would be doing that unless you specifically had program change messages in there, which they've changed how program messages work in Live 11. So if you're not doing anything here, then it shouldn't be affecting the, it's going to be sending this program change messages. It should only be sending the MIDI out. So I'm not sure what else you might be doing with that's making that happen. So you might need to expand on that a little bit. And then Marco had a really fantastic question here that I want to talk about, which is how do you freeze groups? So if you're in a situation like this where you want to like freeze a group, it won't let you do that. Same thing with like, actually you can freeze sidechain tracks now. So you're not gonna be able to freeze the group. So what I would do is probably just shift select all of the tracks that are in the group simultaneously, right click, and then hit freeze tracks, and it'll do both of them at the same time. and that would be the fast way to do it. And then when you're done, you can unfreeze it or flatten them however you want. But the actual group itself, you're not gonna be able to freeze it. If you wanted to have like a bounced out version of, you wanted just like the combined audio of just one of your group as like a stem, you could either, when you go to your export, go to just the group track and then bounce out just that group track, and then you have just a audio version of just that group track as an external audio file. That'd be an easy way to get all of your group baked into one stem. So if you want to freeze all the group processing, yeah, I think bounce, like what I just showed you for exporting, bounce out the group as a stem and then just bring it back in. Other than that, the other option would be, instead of using a group, so I'm going to Shift Command G to ungroup those, is we're going to just add an extra audio track right here. And we're just going to call this a group. You can name it whatever you want, but. And on the audio for this track and this track, instead of sending them out to the master, we're going to send them to our group track, like that. So now when this plays, we'll set the monitor to in on this guy. Let's go into our group track with all our group processing on it. Let's put some like echo and just so we can hear it. And then now, this should be interesting. I'm gonna see if this works. I'm gonna make sure we're not giving you bad information. Set the, see if this works either. No, that's not gonna work either. Sorry, I lied to you. I tried to get creative here, but that does not work either. Is there gonna be an easy workaround for freezing them? Yeah, I think exporting the group is gonna be your best bet. And then you can just mute or delete the rest of the track. Is there going to be any other way that I'm just blanking on in terms of freezing a group? Yeah, you could resample it. I find exporting it is a little faster, but you could just take the audio out of the group, send that to an audio track, and then just record, enable it over here, and record it here. Send these guys back to the group. And that would include all the effects that are on there. This happens in real time, so it's a little bit, you have to like wait for the whole thing to record, whereas exporting it and then just selecting the group will be faster than real time. But up to you, either one of those two, you're basically gonna have to resample it. Yeah, you can do groups within groups. If you're like if you're doing it to reduce CPU, I think Jeff has a really good point. Just freeze all the tracks inside of the group, and then unless you're doing like really heavy amounts of processing on your group, then you can just let the group effects live there. No worries, Marco. Interesting after party. So you are just having push to a MIDI clip to the microfreak, and then the microfreak is getting program change messages. I would first thing I'd do is just inspect this area right here, like hit this little triangle on the clip and see if it's like changing somehow without you knowing. If that's not changing, then live might not be the issue. It might just be the microfreak being weird, and it might have nothing to do with MIDI from the push or live causing those program changes. That sounds like a weird, like there's a ghost living in your synth kind of situation. Sweet, but those are all been really great questions so far. I think I'm all caught up on the questions. Feel free to let me know if I missed something in chat. But also, if you are just joining us, you're also welcome to toss any questions you may have in the chat. I'm just here to hang out and answer whatever you guys got. Yeah, I'll brainstorm a little bit and see if I can think of anything that is a little bit easier for freezing groups, but I normally don't bother freezing groups, usually. So Janef is asking, is it possible to find tempo for a vocal? For just like an acapella? Finding the tempo for an acapella can be really tricky, Janef. I think that usually what you want to do, so if it's a song you already know and like, just find out the tempo of the song that you know and like. That's an easy way to start with it. Like in a demo vocal or something like that. So a lot of the things in the daemon, in the like core library, will already have their tempo built into it. So if I went in here, let's go in here if we can sign like vocal sample. That's a synth vocal. Those are all one shots. I want to find like a loop. I need to get more vocal samples because people always ask me about them and then I never know. I can never have like stuff ready to go. Okay, so a lot of these guys, we were to toss them in here. Well, this is like super ambient, so it's not going to have like a really dialed in timing. But live will generally, if it's like a pre-made loop or something like that, it'll already guess the tempo down here. Usually this is pretty accurate. Yeah, if it's something in the core library, for example, it shouldn't, like, are there many vocals in here? So like this one, for example, it says it's 130 BPM. It already knows it's 130 BPM down here in the tempo. So those things like that, you don't really need to worry so much about. Things with like really clear timing, mostly you can like stretch them and move them around and it's not a big deal. But for pre-made loops, they're already kind of built into it. It's like already kind of part of how they're built out. Let's see if those are just synth ones. These are all one shots. If it's a one shot, it doesn't matter what tempo it's at. You can play it at any tempo you want. But for something where it's like somebody like, you know, rapping or singing a verse or something like that, what I would recommend doing is finding timings where the start of the phrase is really important. So let's actually try this out. So let me go in my sample library, and when in doubt, we're going to be using Missy Elliott as our guide. Janef, I'm not quite sure you're asking. So if you're talking about core library loops, then vocals, then lead take. Let me check what you're talking about. Core library loops, vocal, lead tech. I don't know if I have that sample in here. Samples, loops. I don't have one. Oh, there's a vocal. I don't have a thing called lead tech, do I? Oh, this one.
Standing in the rain.
Okay, this is what you're asking about. Found it. Got it. So something like this. super long take. Let's try this out.
Standing.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to prioritize the timing for the start of each phrase, right? So this guy right here, this is the start of this phrase.
Standing in the.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to hit set 111 here. That way the 1 starts right on time.
Standing in the. Standing.
Or I might even do it a little earlier at this little start of the S there.
Standing in the. Standing in.
Maybe I'll zoom in even more and just do it like right there.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain. I was doing silly things just to make you look at me. Couldn't win.
All right, so I am going to be prioritizing the timing of each phrase individually. And because vocals, some of those parts will be on time, and it's really important that they're on time, and some of them can move around a little bit. Chat, just so you guys know, I will catch up to chat in just a minute, but I want to make sure I answer this question. So something like this, it's starting me at 107.5.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain.
So this phrase right here is right on time where I want it to be. So that's a good sign, but I can always change it. You can always move things around. So if you need words to be more or less on time, you can double click to add word markers and you can move them around to be wherever you want. So you can adjust it kind of to whatever your taste is. And a little bit of moving around and warping like that is totally fine. That's not going to like really mess up your timing. A lot, something like that, it's going to sound crazy and weird, but manually moving things around to kind of figure out what timing it is can be really helpful. The other thing that you can do, you can try out, it may or may not work on an instrumental, or sorry, an acapella like this, is if you right click and hit warp from here straight, this can oftentimes also adjust the timing a little bit and get you something that might be a little closer to being on time. That looked like that did not work at all. We're going to undo that. But for songs and things like that, you can put them on time. The other thing that I'll often do for a phrase like this, where I'm just like kind of trying to get the timing right, let me toss this in here, is do it like phrase by phrase. There's some like pretty clear spaces here where like this phrase, you know, anything on this side is one phrase. Let me make this smaller. And like there's another phrase right here. And that way I'm not trying to warp everything all at the same time. So now I have like, this can be one phrase that I can warp and kind of move on time. This can be a different set of phrases that I can warp and move on time. And this can be a different set of phrases that I can warp and move on time, rather than trying to do the whole thing all at the same time. So I'm gonna take a listen to this with the metronome and see how it sounds.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain. I was doing silly things just to make you look at me. Couldn't.
So here's the next phrase. So we can even divide this up and chop this up here and then focus on just this one particular phrase, right? So we could start by just like manually moving things around, just by like clicking and dragging and seeing kind of like where that gets us for our timing.
Standing in the rain, feather.
So this is like the next kind of like beat, right? Standing in the rain.
Standing in the rain.
So maybe I want that rain to be right here, standing in the rain, and that way it punctuates with the beat. Keep in mind, this is changing my segment BPM, so I'm going to change my global tempo to line up with it a bit more.
Standing in the rain, feather down in.
This is the next kind of phrase down here, or this is the next kind of like downbeat, right? So I'm going to put a warp marker here, I'm going to put a warp marker here, and move that there. What's up, love? How have you been? So
standing in the rain, feather down in my brain. I was doing.
Cool. So now I'm listening to the important words and trying to put them on time, right? And this is what you kind of have to do for an acapella because you don't have a beat to line things up. So standing, rain, whatever this word was.
Standing in the rain, feather down
in
my brain. I was.
Another brain right here. That's on time. So already just by putting in these 3 warp markers, everything else is starting to line up better.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain. I was doing silly things just to.
So this one's a little early, that's fine. This one's a little bit early too, so we can move that there.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain. I was doing silly things just to make you look at me.
That one's kind of weird, so I might like put that there. I don't know. We can like play around with it. So that's what I'm gonna be doing, phrase by phrase in an acapella like this. Just kind of like figure out what the timing, what the general kind of pulsing and the rhythm of the vocals are, and then make sure that those pulses, those important parts of the phrase, are on time with the grid. Everything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this is a little bit early. It doesn't matter if this is a little bit late. Just keep those important timings where you want it to be. The rest of it can kind of float where you want it. And as you start to do this, you can start to see that like the timing is going to start to dial in a little bit, and you can kind of get a better sense of what the tempo of that clip's going to be. And this works for a lot of acapellas. It's a lot of work sometimes. Sometimes it's really easy. Hopefully that makes sense. We can do it for a different one just to try it out again. Let's go to this one right here. So we're going to start with the timing here, and we'll put the one there so it's easier. Start it here.
Standing in the rain.
That's the same phrase. Is there a different phrase that they use?
Swear.
Try this back up.
Swear. Already gone and it's late, so it's best that I be home. I'll leave you to it now. In between your red and...
All right, we'll try this one. Like I said, sometimes it's a pain in the ass, but once you get it, it can work pretty well.
In between your red and blue, yeah, tell the truth, there's nothing to lose.
Why does that sound so slow?
In between your red and blue, yeah, tell the truth, there's nothing to lose. Where are in between your red and blue, yeah,
3, 4.
In between
1,
your red
2.
and blue, yeah, tell.
So just move that one there. So you can just like move things around a little tiny bit to get the pulses of those vocals to be more on time. And that's kind of what you're going to be doing. And once you kind of figure out what the segment BPM is, you kind of want your global tempo to be somewhere kind of in the similar range, similar amount of timing. And that's usually how you do it. Yeah, tap temping can also work for sure. All right. All right, so jumping back in chat a little. Sorry, I'm going to be catching up on questions. I appreciate your patience. So username was asking, can you demonstrate how to route the post-effects audio to a new track without the pre-effects audio? I'm not entirely sure if I understand that question. So what you want to do is, if you have, let's get rid of all this stuff. We'll use this vocal.
Standing in the rain, standing in the rain, feather down.
We have something like this, and so we put some effects on it. We'll use echo again.
Standing in the rain, feather.
And you want to record the pre-effects. Let me read the question again. How to route the post-effects audio to a new track without the pre-effects audio. Seems a little contradictory. So you want the post-effects audio, which means with the delay, and then you said without the pre-effects audio, which is without the delay. I'll show you either one of them, because either one of them can work. It's just not both at the same time. So if you want to grab it pre-effects, when you're grabbing audio from, and we're grabbing from this track right here, we have the option for either pre-effects, post-effects, post-mixer. So pre-effects means if I record over here, it's going to record it without the delay on it.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain, I was doing silly things.
So here's this one without the, this can be the recording we just made without the delay.
Standing in the rain.
Right? If I grab post effects, it's going to grab with the delay, but regardless of what volume is right here. So let me keep this low. So if I record here now,
Standing in the rain,
this is still receiving volume, regardless of whatever this volume is. But it has the delay built in there. Post mixer is generally what you usually do. That's going to grab it after the mixer here. So it's going to, like, changing the volume here will change the volume that's being recorded.
Standing in the rain, feather down in my brain, I was doing silly things. Look at me.
Like that. So you want to grab just the process signal, right? If that's what you're asking. In that situation, what I would do is on the track with the effect on it, just take the dry wet, turn it to 100%. And then you just get the wet signal. You just get the delayed signal. And then that would work. Or you could use a return track and you can record from a return track. So if we have something like this, where we have, once again, our vocal lady, go into the reverb, and then take our reverb and then send this to our audio 6 track over here. Delete this guy. Record, enable it, record this here. This will only record the reverb.
Standing in the rain, feather down.
We won't be able to hear it right now because we have monitor set to off.
Look at me.
But now, if I play this, we're getting just the wet signal. So that would also work. But yeah, the key would be just to make sure either your wet signal goes to 100% and then you just record that, or you could do some fancier routing with a return track and record that. Yeah, either one of those would be good options for something like that. I would probably lean more towards using the return track and then just resampling the return track, because you can send the audio out of the return track to any regular track and then record onto that track. But by default, they go to the master. Cool. All right. And then after part is asking what happens. So I have a blank MIDI track in the session view, and when I hit record empty track and play more notes on the push to, parameters on the microphone immediately get warped. Cutoff goes all the way up and down. Doesn't happen until recording starts. Interesting. I don't think that is program changing. I think that is probably just whatever MIDI signal is coming in from the push. When the microphone receives that MIDI signal for those CCs, it just tries to match them. Most likely is what's happening there. I'm trying to think if there's a way to, if you just want to send MIDI, okay, cool. What I would probably do in that situation is, instead of using the external instrument as the way you're sending MIDI to your microfreak, is I would instead send MIDI to, and what you have to do is in your MIDI settings on the output, make sure you have track turned on, but not remote. Actually, track would probably still send it. That's not going to work. Just as an experiment, after party, instead of using the external instrument, try sending MIDI using the MIDI out here to send your MIDI to the microfreak. I'm not sure if that's going to solve your problems. You might still have issues with it, but I think I'm curious to see how that goes. Otherwise, we might need to figure out a way to isolate it so that you're blocking MIDI CCs and only MIDI notes are going to the microfreak, which you can do with Max for Live, or you can probably, I'm trying to think there's an easier way to do that. But I'll look into it, because it's kind of a weird, interesting little situation. Jersey Beats, apologize for taking so long to get to your question. So you're asking about the stability of Live 11. Honestly, I think it's been pretty stable for me. I've been playing around with the 11.1 beta, and it depends on what kind of computer you're using, but if you're using one of the new Silicon chips, 11.1, whenever that finally gets released, is designed for the new Mac Silicon chips. Overall, it's been pretty stable. Occasionally, I'll get weird CPU spikes that I'm not entirely sure where they're coming from or why they're happening. But for the most part, they've sorted out a lot of the issues they had at a Live 11's launch, at least in my experience. Chat, I don't know if you have any experiences of stability or crashes or anything like that with Live 11, but for the most part, it's been pretty good for me. Yeah, Love. I think going at the MIDI out to his Micro Freak instead of using the external instrument might help with some of the extra MIDI messages that are being sent out. But I'm not entirely sure. I would need to test it out for myself. Yeah, like I said, I think it's been pretty stable. I think the only issues I ever really have with Live is when I'm streaming. When I'm not streaming, Live tends to be pretty well behaved. It's just my computer doesn't like doing streaming and complex stuff with Live at the same time. That's really kind of when it freaks out and doesn't have as good of a time. It definitely feels like it's getting better. I'm stoked for when the official version of 11.1 comes out and I can use all my plugins in it. Because right now my big issue with 11.1 is that a lot of my third-party plugins don't work with it. I'm hoping that they fix that and that gets updated a little bit. Sweet. Well, I think I caught up on all the questions in chat so far. Appreciate you guys coming in here and asking those questions. Oh, it worked? Sick. At first I was like, I think this will work. And then I thought about it some more. I was like, maybe this won't work. So I'm glad it did. Yeah, Mac and streaming are not the best of friends, especially for me. Yeah, I've got a lot of crazy audio routing stuff going on. I think also just my computer doesn't like video for some reason. And I think my OBS just also doesn't like me. Oh, good F part. I'm so glad that works for you. So just send a MIDI out. And that way, I think it mostly just focused on sending the MIDI notes out and not sending all the crazy automation or anything like that, or any of the info from the push. Unless you turn it off on the push, it shouldn't send any info through from the push. Sweet. Well, if there's anybody who is just joining us, I see we got a few more people in here. Welcome. If you have any questions about pretty much anything related to music production with Ableton Live, feel free to toss those questions in the chat. That's what we do here on Mondays, is I hang out and you guys ask me questions and I try to answer them. Brian, there is not going to be a way to make it locked to a grid unless you are using capture. So we talked about capture a little bit earlier today. Let me grab an actual drum beat or drum rack. I just toss in here. Let me get rid of all this stuff. So when I play a drum beat on something like this, and then I hit capture, it mostly puts it on the grid for me. And then it changes my global tempo to match that grid. So capture is the closest thing I've gotten to something like that. The other thing that I've done, especially with the push, is just use the quantize function on the push. So I record something, and then I hit quantize in the push, and that'll quantize it based off of my current quantize settings. The real answer to most of my questions is just use capture. Capture just makes everything better. All right, so username was asking, I found if I plug the USB into my Minilog or XD or Minilog while capturing audio through the standard 1/4-inch jack, get low-level buzzing, which immediately, so if I unplug the USB. Interesting. Yeah, so that might be a grounding thing. There might be like a faulty wire or something like that inside of your synth that just when it gets a signal from the USB is just causing that buzzing. I would also try just swapping out a different different MIDI cable, but most likely that sounds like a grounding thing or some kind of soldering issue inside of your synth that's causing that. So yeah, so try different MIDI cables. If you're feeling adventurous, you could try unscrewing your synth and taking a look inside and seeing if there's like something that's loose or some cable that's causing issues like that. Yeah, it's one of the nice things about MIDI cables is they're so low tech that they don't cause issues. There's nothing really like a MIDI cable is not really going to cause you any issues most likely. But yeah, if the MIDI cable works, then use the MIDI cable. I don't think you're not really going to get unless you have some kind of software that integrates with your synthesizer. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't even need to be like a high quality USB cable. Sometimes you just get faulty USB cables. Sometimes they just like break, or they just like something goes wrong in them just from wear and tear. I had this one session where I was helping some guy out, and he was like, my MIDI controller is broken, like it just doesn't work. And he was like, I don't want to spend a bunch of money on a brand new controller. And so I like spent tons of time like checking everything in his studio, and it turned out it was just his USB cable. And I was like, oh, just get another $2 USB cable, and you're good to go. And you don't need to spend an extra $500 on a new controller. You generally, I don't think, should need a DI box for a synth like that. That's definitely a solution. If you feel like the signal coming through your synth is too quiet, but I think it's most likely either a cable or like a issue on the inside of your synth more than anything else. All right, so Marco is asking, when you open up Live, if you have no idea, what do you do first? This is a fantastic question. I think it's a really great question. So this is going to vary a lot depending on who you ask. For me personally, I think that you start with whatever inspires you the most. So some days I'm sitting down and I'm like, you know what? I feel like writing a drum beat. So write those drums first. If I was a vocalist, which I'm not, and vocals are the thing that like I feel passionate about, start with the vocals. Just follow your heart more than anything else in terms of like which kind of sound do you like to start with. For me personally, I would say 80 to 85% of the time, it's drums. The reason I like to start with drums is that when I'm recording my bass line and my melody and all my other stuff that I'm working on, I don't like recording to the metronome. To me, this is not a very inspiring sound, right? Like it's just it doesn't sound good. It doesn't make me feel like, oh, I'm like getting into it and exploring these musical ideas. So by writing, even if it's a really basic drum beat like this, that gives me something that I can kind of vibe with and I can kind of work with, and then I can use that instead of using the metronome. And that way, when I get down to like, okay, I'm writing my bass line, or writing my melody next, or writing my chord progression next, or whatever, whatever I feel inspired to write, I have something as a foundation to work with. This also helps me out a lot deciding like kind of what tempo I'm at. Oftentimes when I'm thinking about ideas and kind of trying to figure out what the song's actually going to be about, I'll try like, write a drum beat like this and then speed it up, slow it down, something like that. And kind of like move back and forth to really kind of feel out what kind of rhythm I want to work with. So I usually start with drums just to kind of like get that rhythm, get a kind of feeling of how I'm going to play everything else. But it's up to you. A lot of times I'll just start with sound design. I'll just like screw around to make a cool sound, and then that's the concept. So use your intuition, use whatever you're excited about at the time, and then start with that. I think is generally the place to get started. Mike is asking, Mike, well, welcome. Do you have templates or ALC presets to have to start tracks quickly? Absolutely. In fact, I am in the process of updating and changing a lot of them for my Song a Week challenge that I'm going to be embarking on, and I'm testing things out right now. But the templates folder right here, I got my new production template that I'm working on. This is still very much a work in progress. I'm going to be tweaking it, especially over the next month. So that way, starting January, I'm going to have it really dialed in. Let me fix my plugins. But this is what my current template looks like, my current production template. I think I've talked about this on chat before, and I think once I do finally dial this in and do a little bit more with it, I'm going to make a video on it for the channel and probably just release it and people can download it for free. The big thing that I've done in my production template here is names of tracks and colors of tracks and some basic effects. And that's it. I find that the more that I really dial in my, or the more details I put in my template, the more it actually narrows my ability to make songs, because I end up making the same song over and over again because the template is made in a specific way. So I like to keep it very open-ended. So I got a drum group here that has a drum rack. It's got a real basic kick and snare in it right now. Just there's something that's in there. I will probably tweak this, and this is going to be totally redone by the time I redo my template. But drum rack, mostly empty. With a few effects, then I got a few effects on some of these guys. I have an empty drum rack for percussion, and then I have an audio drum rack for percussion. Because sometimes I like to do my percussion with MIDI. Sometimes I just like use some loops or some audio or one-shots or whatever. So those are all in there. The other thing that you'll notice about my template is that all of my tracks start at -12 decibels, and all of them have an EQ8 and a utility. So if I jump to any one of these, that's how they're all starting, all at -12 decibels. And then I have this other group that is literally everything else. So I have a subtrack that's just an operator with a saturator. That's it. I have bass 1 and 2. There's nothing on there. I guess that the big thing here for me is names of tracks and colors of tracks. So that way I can load up anything in here that I want, and they're already named and colored the color that I like. Color coding is really big for me. I have 2 synth tracks. These are also both empty, just EQ8 and utility. That way I can just grab whatever synth I want, toss it in here, and start going with it. I have a piano track because I actually kind of like tone piano for writing melodies and things like that. It's just the Ableton preset grand piano, not much else going on. And I have another sampled instrument. This is just a contact. It's just an empty contact, and that way I can load it up because I like using contact, and it's really handy to have around. And then I have effects 1, which you can only kind of, I guess you can see that, which is a MIDI track for audio effects. And then I have effects 2, which is an audio effect for effects. And then I have, you can't really see them because they're behind my head. I have 3 return tracks, 1 Valhalla Shimmer, 1 Valhalla Vintage Verb, and then another Valhalla Vintage Verb, which is just for my snare. So those are my 3 return tracks, and they all have compressors and EQ8s on them. But that's it. So yeah, so that way it keeps it bare bones enough that I don't feel locked into making a certain thing or doing a specific thing with my songs. But every single song I've written for the last probably 8 or 9 years has used the exact same color scheme and order. So my drums are always purple, they're always on the left. My bass are always blue, and those are next to them. My synths are always green, and those are next to the bass. My sampled instruments are yellow, and those are next to the synths. And then my effects are orange, and those are next to the sampled instruments. So it's always the same colors, and it's always the same order. That way, if I open up a track I haven't worked on in a long time, and I'm trying to figure out where things are, this helps me navigate through that. So that I think is really big. Color coding and being really systematic about how you organize your sessions, more important than almost anything else when it comes to building a template like this. And then, what's the other thing I was going to mention about templates? That might be it for right now in terms of templates. I used to have a bunch of groups. I used to have like a bass group and then a synth group and a sample instrument groups. And then I've stopped using groups as much. And right now I just have this sidechain group. But I might change how this works. I might get rid of this or I might not get rid of it. I haven't decided yet. So after party, I honestly haven't really spent a lot of time with the new string and brass stuff. Honestly, for the most part, if I want strings or brass, I've just been using Contact for such a long time for exactly those things, and I like the Contact ones. I might play around with them a little bit more this week, and maybe next week I'll come back and give you some feedback on what I think about them and when and where and why and how I might use them. But I haven't like really dived into them super in depth. So Mike is saying, I was wondering about improv and how you could save presets / track templates. Any advice? I'm not sure what you mean by improv in this situation, like improvisation with your process for templates and things like that, and saving presets. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, but the main thing I think about when it comes to especially templates is what are the things I do all the time? What are the things I'm consistently doing every single time I'm making music, and then include those in the templates. Oh, and track templates, I did mention those. So when I hit Command T, it makes a new audio track. It starts at negative 12 decibels, which matches the decibels of my rest of my tracks. And then it also has an EQ8 and utility on it. So that's my audio template. And then my MIDI template is the exact same thing. Negative 12 decibels, EQ8, and utility. And that's it. Yeah, those are my templates there for my tracks. Pretty straightforward. If you guys haven't, I should maybe make a video on this because I think this is really important. If you guys are starting your songs with all of your tracks at 0 decibel, I'm not going to say you're wrong, but I think you're probably wasting a lot of time and not realizing it. Do yourself a favor, start with your tracks at like negative 12 decibels and just see how it feels. I think it's infinitely better. It saves me a lot of time. It saves me a lot of headache because if everything is already up at 0 decibels and you want something to be louder, you can't make it any louder because you're already at 0. I mean, you can go up to +6 or whatever, but like I'm assuming a lot of your things are already kind of sitting around 0. Give yourself more headroom when you're producing, and it will, number 1, sound better. Number 2, it'll be easier to hear what's happening. And number 3, if you need things to be louder, you just turn up that one thing and make it louder. So give yourself more headroom. I know some people, and I'm even thinking about making this switch, starting with 18 decibels headroom. So starting with all your tracks down at negative 18. And I think that that's also an interesting way to look at it. And then the big complaint I have when people are like, well, if everything's at negative 12 decibels, it's too quiet. Well, that's why you have an audio interface with a gain output control that allows you to turn it up on your headphones or your speakers or whatever you're working on. So give yourself more headroom on your tracks and then crank up the volume on your interface. It will sound better and you will be a better producer because of it. All right. After party, there is not a way to hide groups from showing up on the push. This is actually one of the reasons I'm not as into groups. You could do kind of the thing I did before, where you get rid of the, instead of using a group, you just have like an extra audio track over here, like way on the far right, and then route all your other tracks into that extra track. Like that. And so now over here is my group, so it doesn't get in the way of the push. All right. Sorry, chat. It takes me a minute to like read everybody's questions, so I apologize about that. So Mike was asking, more if I had some nice sounds coming from an audio track, how should I set track presets plugins to help manage incoming sound? I think that really depends a lot on you and like what are the ways you like processing. Like for me specifically, if I'm working with a vocalist, there are certain things certain ways I like my vocalist to sound. And it may vary a little bit from vocalist to vocalist and from track to track, but there's certain kind of like, I like this effect and then this effect and then this effect. I like using my, tiny bit of delay, heavy amount of reverb, and then an EQ. Like that might be like a combination that I really like, right? So as I'm doing this, as I notice that like, oh, I use this same combination over and over again. So in this example, I'm gonna have a delay, I'm gonna have a reverb, let's use hybrid, and an EQ after that. So say I notice that specifically I like using the ping pong delay on these kind of like mid frequencies with a really low feedback and a really low dry wet, combined with a hybrid reverb using the, let's use the rich reverb hall going into the shimmer with the dry wet of about 25%, and then cutting out anything below 80 hertz, and then trimming down anything below 10,000. So like say that's the combo that I like using with my vocalist, maybe even one specific vocalist that I work with over and over again. You kind of start to realize like, okay, these are the things I like to do to their vocalist to give it that kind of sound, right? So then you're going to take all these guys, Command G, put them inside of a rack, hit this little button here. I guess you don't have to, you can hit this button down here. I'm just used to doing it this way. Hit this button here, a little save button. This is going to be our vocal example, but you could call it whatever your vocal chain is. Save it as a rack, and then boom, now you have access to those things together in the combination you want with all the settings that you want. You don't even need to use any macros or be fancy about it. You could just be like using the rack to save things together, all your plugins together, all your combos. You like think of your effects or your processing like combos. When you find a good combo, put it in a rack, save it as the combo, and then every time you use it, you just tweak the settings a tiny bit depending on how you want it to sound, and then that saves you tons and tons of time. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but this is how I organize a lot of my effects and a lot of my presets that save me from having to like do all that from scratch every single time. So hopefully that answers your questions. So Marco is asking, what about having utility set on negative 10 decibels? That is, weirdly enough, not going to be the same thing. Specifically because of the way summing works. And I am not advanced enough at math to explain to you the math behind summing and how it works. So summing is basically, each one of these tracks is outputting a sound, right? A volume, frequency, that kind of stuff. all of that information is going from individual waveforms that are kind of moving up and down, and they're all being sent into the master track and combined as one waveform. And the summing engine is the math behind that, like I said, couldn't honestly explain to you. So doing something like taking a utility and putting it on the master and setting it to negative 10 decibels is different than turning down each one of your tracks to negative 10 decibels because of the way summing works. And I'm not going to say that this necessarily is bad, but I'm going to say from my own personal experience and from people I've talked to and people I've worked with, mostly from my own personal experience, turning down each one of your tracks individually and starting with a large amount of headroom is going to just straight up sound way better than having everything being loud and then turning it down 10 decibels on the master. Oh, on every track. I think that's roughly the same thing on each individual track. For me, I like having the volume controls here so I can kind of visually see the level of the triangle here or the level of the volume on the track itself, and then being able to control that as I need to. And then I specifically use the utility for automating. So the automation on the gain here, if I want, which track am I on? Let's do this one. So if I want to do like a fade out or a fade in, I do that with the utility, but then I can still change the volume here to be whatever I want it to be. So utilities on tracks, that's why I have the utility on every single one of my tracks, is specifically so I can automate it up and down. I think theoretically in my brain, could be wrong about this because the math might be different, turning this down by 5 decibels is the same thing as turning this down by 5 decibels. And then I think Janef was asking something earlier, but I missed it. Maybe I'm wrong. Janef is saying, so if you don't have an audio interface, it's going to be a lot trickier because the audio interface is going to allow you to make up for a lot of, it's going to be a much quieter volume going to your headphones or your speakers. So, realistically, if you can invest in an audio interface, that'll make a huge difference. Just being able to hear what you're doing and being able to get a better sense of what's happening in your track for sure. If you don't have the audio interface, then you're not going to be able to work at low headrooms or large headrooms. So in that case, you would just keep everything a bit louder. Yeah, Janef, that could work. You could use the utility in the master to turn things back up. But the better option is definitely going to be the audio interface. Yeah, Marco, it's going to be basically the same. For me, this is easier because I can visually see where everything's at the same time on all the individual tracks. Whereas the utility, I have to go into each track and adjust the gain, and I can't see what the utility is on this one until I click on it and then adjust the gain. So that's more of a workflow thing. In terms of audio quality, I think it should be roughly the same thing. All right, and then After Party is asking, what would I do when my output on my synth is very low going into line inputs on the back of my interface? I can't affect the input gain on my interface for the inputs in the back. So I'm assuming in this situation, you are cranking the volume coming from your synth. So the synth is sending out a pretty loud signal, and then you're going into the back of your interface, which doesn't have a gain control on it. What kind of interface doesn't have a gain control on the back? I'm just curious. because first off, first thing I would probably do is I would check to see if there's a software program that goes with your interface. Most of them do these days, that allow you to control gain internally inside your interface from the software. And that would be probably a good way to, that'd be probably the first thing I would check, just to see if like it might have a gain knob on the interface itself, but there might be in the software a way to adjust gains, input gains for extra inputs. That'd be the first thing I would check. Yeah, the other option would be just plug them into the inputs that have a gain control, and then you could just adjust it there. If you are not able to do any of those things for whatever reason, then I'm trying to think what would be the best option. If you're just getting a low, like a really quiet signal going into live, you probably just have to turn up the gain in live. It's not ideal. It's not what you want to do. But that's going to be the situation. You can get something like, what's the cloud thing called? Cloud Lifter. So I have been meaning to buy one of these for a long time. This is supposed to be a miracle. It's supposed to work really well. You can basically plug in the input and just boost the signal. If you have a stereo synthesizer, this is designed for microphones, so I'm not sure how well it works with your synth. But this is something I've heard very good things about, and I've been meaning to buy one myself to test it out. Because my microphone gain, I had to do crazy amounts of stuff just to boost the gain of my microphone coming in, to get the audio quality you're getting right now. But something like this, a DI box could do something kind of similar, although I wouldn't rely on the DI box to do the job for you. And it's mono, yeah. So you could see if there's something similar to this that is stereo. They might have like another company might. Is this one stereo? Let's see. Boom, there's a stereo one. You just have to get the CL2. Looks like they got a bunch of different options for different types. But yeah, this is supposed to be really nice, and it's supposed to work really well. I think this might be my Christmas present to myself. But yeah, before you buy a cloud lifter, check to see if there's a PreSonus software for customizing inputs on different things. Let me check out the Echo Dream. That was just a pedal. Nice, yeah, you could get a pedal. You could just like get some kind of pedal, run your synth through the pedal that has a gain control on it. They can boost up the signal. Yeah, I think you've got a few options out there for trying out different things when it comes to boosting your signal going in. But you want to make sure you have a nice quality signal going in to your interface, and then make sure your interface is receiving that and getting a nice signal coming out into live. Because I recently just I was just mixing a song where the vocals were very, very quiet going in. Like you could still hear them. They still sounded okay, but they were very, very quiet. And so I had to crank up the vocals, and then I got all this noise, and I had to gate out the noise, and then that caused issues. It just becomes like such a pain in the ass when you're working with really quiet recordings. So make sure you're getting a nice loud signal going in. And like, yeah, a little bit of noise is probably fine if you're doing a bunch of like big lush synth sounds, then a tiny bit of noise is not going to like be the end of the world in your recording. If you have to like really crank up the gain. I wonder if Presonus has a software. Yeah, I would check the Presonus. Check that software first, because oftentimes they will have gain controls for all of your inputs in the software, and that might just fix your problem straight up. Sweet. Was anybody else got any other questions for me? I appreciate all you guys coming in here and having all these fantastic questions. We covered a lot of different topics today. And if you are enjoying the stream, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, any of that kind of stuff. Check out the Discord, check out the Patreon. All that stuff is greatly appreciated. Damn, I'm jealous of all the synth you guys, all the gear you guys have. I need to buy some more hardware. It's funny how like hardware is very much coming back in style in a really big way. Nice. Yeah, once you start buying hardware, it's really hard to stop. I had to stop with my modular once I filled my case, and so I've got a full case of modular, and I haven't bought any modules in like 6 months, and I am very much looking to maybe swap out a few modules. And if you are just joining us, you are more than welcome to toss any questions you may have in the chat. Well, there's so many ways to do digital versions of modular synthesizers now. Yeah, with Max for Live. If you guys haven't played around with, what's the name of the Max for Live modular synthesizer? I always forget. Is it Palace? Is that the right one? Or is this something else? Let me check. I don't have any mutable instrument stuff. I had one or two mutable instruments clones. So they were kind of like knockoff versions. No, that's not the right one. The Bengal? No, why am I not remembering the right name here? Does anybody remember the name of the modular synthesizer? Ocelot. Yeah. Do I not have it installed here? There we go. I knew it was something to do with cats. Yeah, if you haven't tried this out, this is not a free live pack, so you do have to pay for it. But if you are interested in getting into or learning about modular synthesizers, it is really fun and it's really easy. You can just like, all right, I want an oscillator. Here's an FM oscillator, and I want a like sequencer. Here's a bunch. Here's like a Euclidean sequencer, and we can like connect these together to start patching things. And it's really easy and it's very fun, and it just gives you lots and lots of options if you are like tempted to go down that road. If you're like interested in learning more about modular synthesizers and how to start patching things and kind of like how CV works, this is a really cool place just to get started with that stuff. And there's like tons of modules in here. See a sampler. There's a granular sampler. I might have to play around with this more. And if you're familiar with Max for Live, it works the exact same way, where you just connect things together, and there's pre-built little patches for you. Not patches, like objects. Yeah, so we got like an audio output here, like a VCA. You can like connect that there. Oops. Connect that out there, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like a nice alternative to VCV Rack, which is also a really cool way to get into modular stuff without getting too deep into modular stuff. Someday I might have a stream where we just do some digital modular stuff. Yeah, a lot of the Max for Cat stuff has this kind of like either modular or semi-modular stuff. Bengal's kind of the same way. You guys haven't played around with Bengal. Bengal's basically just imagine operator on steroids, I guess would be the way to describe Bengal. Why is that very quiet? I am not hearing anything. Oh, it's not going to the master, that's why. All right, so it's an FM synthesizer where you have all of your crazy FM controls, individual ADSRs. You can do, still very quiet. It's very lossy sensitive. And then you can, has an oscilloscope down here. We got really cool filters. We have an LFO, we have sequencers, we have envelopes, we have built-in effects, including XY controllers, we have math, we have big pressures, reverb. And say I want to like put an LFO onto my filter, you can patch them together like that. Go to our LFO here. Why is that not? That's filter 2, that's why. Let's go to filter 1. So you can start patching together stuff in here, and it's pretty sweet. It just gives you lots of options, and if you like are into FM synthesis, it just gives you tons of things you can do with it, and also a cool way to kind of like learn a little bit about modular along the way, because you can kind of start to like patch things together down here. Outputs can go different places. You can like patch MIDI to like pitch can control different things. It's pretty sweet. You can change the routing here. Fantastic synthesizer. Yeah, VCV Rack is awesome. and it seems like they're getting more and more stuff all the time. I have an issue with VCV Rack where VCV Rack to me is just not that interesting. It just like it doesn't really like patching together the cables in VCV Rack like doesn't do the same thing for my brain. It doesn't stimulate my brain the same way doing it in real life does. But for me to learn how to do a lot of the patching that I'm doing now, I learned a lot of stuff just doing it through VCV. So VCV is a fantastic place to get started with modular stuff. I haven't played around with the soft tube one. I'm going to write that down just so I don't remember it. Looks pretty cool. And one of the things I love about VCV Rack is you can just use it as a third-party plugin. So you can like sequence things in live and send it to VCV Rack, and then send the audio back to live. Sweet. So we are getting a little closer towards the end of stream. I appreciate everybody for coming by. I still got a few minutes left. So if anybody has any questions or things they want me to go over, now would be the time to do it. I will be back tomorrow for the Patreon only stream. So if you guys are Patreon members, you can check that out tomorrow, the normal place. If you are not a Patreon member, go check it out. That's cool. It helps the channel, and it's very nice to me. If you are not interested in that, I'll be back on Wednesday for another song feedback stream. So you guys can send me your tracks and I will take a listen to them on Wednesday. But you guys have been awesome today. It's been really cool to we covered a lot of different topics, from tempo changes and automation to templates and a lot of different cool, weird topics. Fixing MIDI from program changes or whatever. Okay, good to know, love. I will update that so that it's actually linked. Yeah, so Mike, the video I'm going to be releasing on Thursday, I haven't filmed it yet, but I think I'm just going to write a track in half an hour, and just as like a kind of demo of start a song and just film the whole thing and just see how fast I can crank something out. Just as an idea, not like a fully polished finished track, but okay, 30 minutes, get a concept down into the software. Is going to be the video for this week. So that's going to be kind of, again, preempting some of the stuff we're going to be doing over the next year. It won't be entirely a finished track, but it'll be okay, I've got an arrangement in under half an hour from nothing. Yeah, love, I will definitely have to talk more about headroom. I want to have a good angle for headroom that makes sense, and I feel will be useful for people. Maybe I might have to take a song that I'm mixing and then just, I don't know, because headroom mixed it, production headroom, I feel it's a slightly different concept than mixing headroom. I think a lot of people know about headroom in the context of all right, we're mixing, we're gonna turn everything down, and then we're gonna mix. But when they're producing with everything super loud, and I think that might be what I want to talk about. Is all right, when you're making songs, it's gonna sound better when you have lots of headroom, and people just don't really realize that. I don't have a good way to prove it in a video. Awesome, I'm glad you guys liked the noise video. We've been talking about noise and distortion a bunch recently, so I figured it'd be relevant to some of the discussions we've been having on stream. I do love that noise generator. It's so good. So Mike, my general kind of like process when it comes to headroom is, as you saw, when I'm producing, I'm working about 12 decibels of headroom. Give or take a little bit. I'm not too picky about it. If it's -10, that's fine. If it's -14, that's fine. That's kind of where I'm shooting for as I'm producing. That way, as I start mixing, I'm kind of starting it with about 12. And I've just found naturally through the process of mixing, I'll start to turn things up a little bit and then turn things up a little more. And usually through the process of mixing, I'll end at around -6. And then, yeah, mixing definitely leads to creep in volume. So I've found that just naturally, if I start at -12, through the process of mixing and the process I go through, it gets me around -6, which is just where I want it to be for mastering. Yeah, I'll see if I can think of a cool, interesting way to approach headroom as a concept when producing, because I think, like I said, a lot of people think about headroom when they're mixing. They don't think about headroom when they're producing, and I think they could benefit from having more headroom when they're producing. But definitely, I keep it coming with the ideas for videos. I'm always on the hunt for topics for future videos, especially now that I'm only doing once a week. I want to start doing bigger, longer, more in depth, more kind of substantial videos as opposed to like the real quick ones. So any topic that I can really kind of sink my teeth into, uh, that's what I'm kind of shifting the focus of the channel towards a little bit more. That'd be sick. I wouldn't mind. I mean, I know I have a friend who works at Isotope who I guess he got his degree in physics, so he's kind of an audio scientist. Maybe I could get him to come in and talk about something. Yeah, I mean, Mike, that's the $1 million question when it comes to mixing, right? Like, how do you know, get your mix to sound nice and crisp after you've done all that processing to it? That's a fantastic question, After Party. I am of the opinion that if I have a little bit extra headroom, if I'm at like -7, -8 or so, when I'm done mixing, keep it there and just master it at -8. I think that's fine. I think that actually gives me a little bit more room for uh, doing a little bit more saturation and getting a little more creative with my mastering. However, I think just kind of in general, when it comes to moving from the mix to the master, I would rather have a little bit of extra headroom than a little bit less than extra headroom. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would much rather master something at -7 than something at -4. And like that extra room is useful, whereas having less room is not as useful. Or having extra room is not bad necessarily. Yeah, -6 is more just kind of like a general recommendation, in my opinion. It doesn't need to be exactly -6. It's like -5.5, like that's gonna be fine. That's not gonna make a huge difference. It's when you start getting significantly above -6, if you start to get to like -3 or -2, then your mastering engineer, or yourself in some situations, if you're mastering your own stuff, you can't do as much with that, right? So I think in general, it's considered having a little bit of extra headroom is better than having less than 6 decibels headroom. But if you're really worried about it, you could just turn up by a decibel or two, and that'd be fine. You could use a gain utility. I think that my mastering chain, which I think we can probably go over in stream sometime, is going to start with an EQ, and then I'm going to do my saturation, like multi-band saturation. And the multi-band saturation, I can add a lot of volume using that. So that's probably what, if I was dealing with a mix that was really quiet, I would do the saturation and go a little heavier than I normally would on the saturation and see how that sounds. And then I do my compression after that. So between the saturation and the compression, that's where I'm gaining a lot of my gain before I hit my limiter. So those are the primary two places I would look into adjusting settings and kind of making it sound good, or kind of getting the output to be closer to where I want it to be. And then the limiter is going to do that last little extra bit, or limiters in most cases, if I'm using more than one limiter, the extra little bit to get it up to where I need it to be. It's a good question, though. It's like kind of an interesting situation. Like, what do you do if you have extra headroom at the end of your mix? Like, what's the best way to deal with that? Oh, what's up, Andy? So I have mixed feelings about this. I think mastering within the project, there are some benefits to doing it that way. For me personally, I would rather do it in a separate project for a couple reasons. One is just organizationally, and kind of like shifting from one workflow to another. To me, it helps to be like have my like mixing project where I'm in mixing mode when I'm using it, and then like I shift my brain to mastering mode when I'm in my mastering project. That's the big reason. The other reason I like to have a separate project is it's easier for me to have multiple reference tracks, so I can just solo back and forth between my track, reference track, my track, reference track. It also is way easier on CPU if I have like a really big session that I'm mixing, than having to do the mastering on top of it, and then I don't have to worry about my computer stuttering or anything like that when I'm mastering. Those are the main three reasons. But I've mastered in my mix project before, and it's been totally fine, and I think it's a totally legit way to do it if that's how people want to do it. But I just find it more beneficial to have a separate mastering project. Cool. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. As I mentioned, Patreon only stream happening tomorrow, doing like a production stream where I'll be working on a track. And then song feedback stream will be happening on Wednesday. So hopefully I'll see you real soon. Or if not, I will be back here on Monday for another one of these streams. But shout out to you guys thanks for popping by, asking all of the fantastic questions that you've been asking. And yeah, really making this whole thing work. We're getting real close to hitting 2,500 subscribers on the channel, which I'm pretty stoked about. So any help you could provide with, sharing any of my videos or telling your friends or whatever, that would be great. Appreciated. Just trying to push it over that next kind of subscriber number milestone. And then the next one's 5,000. Sweet. Well, yeah, have a good evening, and I'll see you guys later.